Do you want to hear a really good fish story? My dad called me one day. You want to go deep sea fishing? I said, sure. When are we going? He said, well, what about next week? I said, I think I'll bring Mark. That was about 50 years ago, and Mark at that time would have been somewhere around 10 years old. So on Monday morning, the following week, we threw some old blankets and supplies in the back of Dad's Volkswagen truck, and we drove from Slapout. Slapout was a little community where Mother and Dad lived, right outside of Montgomery. And we drove south to Destin, Florida. Destin is in the Florida Panhandle. I always say that it's a part of Florida which ought to be Alabama if they had drawn the state lines all the way to the Gulf. We got in the afternoon. I looked up the fishing boat captain that Dad knew and paid our money, got on the list for tomorrow morning's trip. And we found a restaurant, had a delicious seafood supper. Walked around on the beach for a while, and as the sun was setting and it was beginning to get dark, we found a parking place for the truck and crawled in the back of the truck and spread out the blankets and spent the night under the stars. 50 years ago, you could do that. I wouldn't even dream of attempting something like that now. Tuesday morning, it was a beautiful, clear day, a slight breeze blowing. We made our way to the boat, got on board with 25 or so other people, and started out to the fishing grounds. Now the fishing grounds were about 4 hours away, and so we had plenty of time just at leisure, except I wasn't feeling very leisurely. I got sick. I was seasick. I mean, I was really sick. I'd walk outside for a while, and I was determined that I was not going to throw up. So I would walk around for a while, and then I'd go back in and sit down and put my head in my hands, and I'd stretch out on the bench and try not to think. And of course, when you're trying not to think about getting sick, all you can think about is getting sick. This went on for almost all the trip out to the fishing grounds. And finally, as we got closer, I knew I had to get some fresh air. And I went outside, and just about that time, because we were getting close, the deckhands had started putting fish bait in the tray that was along the railing of the boat. And as they were dumping the bait along the way, I looked at Dad, and he smiled, reached down, took the little stub of a cigar that he always had in his mouth, took it out, reached down with the other hand and got some of the fish bait and put it in his mouth. And as he looked directly at me with that smile, he said, you need to keep the bait moist. I never said my dad didn't have a mean streak in him. After I had thrown up, the captain had slowed the boat and told us we could throw our lines in. We started fishing. The hand lines were furnished by the boat, by the captain. We could get little short rod and reels if we wanted to, but Dad always said he would prefer to fish with a hand line because that way he could feel when the fish bit and he could help set the hook. Made sense. Fishing was pretty good. We caught a number of red snapper and grouper and some other fish. As we would catch them, we would just toss them over into the cooler. We'd have plenty of time to gut and clean them on the way back in. The captain would move the boat around occasionally to find a little bit better spot and to give people on one side a better chance at where the fish were biting. And all of a sudden, about 10 or 12 people down from us on our side of the boat, there was a ruckus and a lot of excitement. And I looked to see what was going on, and a man had snagged a fish. Had to be a pretty good sized fish because it was putting up quite a fight, and in the process had gotten caught in the lines of the people around him. And the deckhands were up trying to get all the lines untangled, trying to get people to get their lines back in and get so they could get the fish in, and the man began to pull the fish in. And while they were working and trying to get everything untangled so they could get a clear pull at the fish, the man just kind of leaned back against the deck. And one of the deckhands saw him and said, "Mister, if you want this fish, you're going to have to get up here and bring it in." And Dad looked at what was happening and he said, "Something's wrong." And no sooner than he had said it, than the man's wife started screaming, "He's having a heart attack!" And sure enough, the man slumped against the cabin of the boat. A man from back on near the other end came forward and said he was a doctor and he would do what he could. So he was examining the man, trying to take care of him, and a couple of other guys stepped up, and between all of them they managed to get the man inside the cabin and stretched out on the table. All the time the deckhands were bringing the fish in. We learned later that the man was dead by the time they got him laid out on the table. Well, the man's wife, their daughter, and her husband were all on the boat. And you can imagine the confusion. The wife was in hysterics. The daughter and her husband didn't know what to do. Everybody was standing around. There was nothing that could be done. And once I realized that we could do absolutely nothing to help, I got my dad and my son, and we moved to the back of the boat where we stood there in silence. The captain had radioed for help, and the authorities had decided that since the man was already dead, the best thing they could do was to head back to shore. Too complicated and unnecessary to bring a helicopter out. And so everybody brought in their lines, and we headed back to port. Dad was standing there, as we all were, quiet, not saying anything. And I looked at him and I said, "Dad, what are you thinking?" He was a man completely at peace with himself when he said, "What a way to go." And I understood. By the way, Dad died, not then, 30 years later, peacefully. The fish, by the way, weighed 55 pounds. What a way to go with a 55-pound grouper on your line. Isn't that a good fish story? Thank you for listening.